Today's presentation is private sector maritime risk management and naval and guidance, lessons learned from the Red Sea crisis. It's going to be given by Daniel Mueller of Ambray's. A little bit about Daniel. Daniel serves as Ambray's analyst for the Indian Ocean and Middle East. He has led the response to heightened war risks in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden as a consequence of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Daniel authored Ambray's unmanned aerial vehicle threat analysis and asset screening methodology, which accompanies advanced BMP gap analysis in Lloyd's risk analytics. In support of Ambray's wider Guardian Assurance Programme, Daniel routinely engages with regional authorities. He holds a master's degree in War and Conflict Studies from the University of Potsdam and served as a navigator with the German Navy. I think I can honestly say that's the first time I've introduced anybody with a master's degree in War and Conflict Studies. We very much welcome you, Daniel, this evening. He'll give his presentation and respond to any questions at the end. So for those of you online, if you'd like to put any questions into the chat box, then we'll deal with those later. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor to Daniel.
Thank you very much. Apologies from my side as well. I had, as part of the presentation, a video prepared that I've unfortunately now been scrapped, but we'll proceed without, and it will be just as informed. I don't need to introduce myself any longer. That was for me. As we said, today is going to be about the lessons learned from the Red Sea crisis. Looking at private maritime security management, risk management sector, naval cooperation, and the shipping industry as a third entity in between, alongside those three. I'll start off with explaining a bit about Ambray to give you an understanding of what sector we're actually operating in. So Ambray started off as a private maritime security company about 14 years ago, a bit over 14 years ago now. And the primary goal was to provide armed guards on merchant ships going through the Indian Ocean, so against the Somali piracy threat. That was the primary and only task for a long time, and there are several other companies that do exactly that as well. Ambray then started venturing out, buying its own ships to supply these guards at embarkation, disembarkation locations at sea, from vessel-borne or vessel-based armories. So we've got the weapons on these boats, got the guards on these boats, and as we own them, we maintain standards of quality of the living spaces, as well as, of course, training capabilities, all these things that we can do on the water. In the industry, that part tends to often be a separate company. So we've got one company providing these vessel-borne armories and a second company providing the guards to the merchant. So we've combined that already in-house. With this, over the years, we've supported now more than 34,000 tasks worldwide, actually, not just the Indian Ocean. We also provide physical security in West Africa, where piracy has been an issue. And we've moved on to digitally supporting vessels as well, remotely. By now, more than 3,700 vessels individually supported, again, worldwide. This is applicable anywhere where there's a perceived threat. As I said, we operate our own fleet, and that is the largest privately operated fleet of this sort in the world. And we pride ourselves in being intelligence-led. So I belong to the intelligence department, which we acquired Ambray Analytics. We focus on data-driven analysis to support all arms of the business, be that the physical side or the digital support or our own service lines. This by now has translated to three core pillars of our digital services. So alongside the physical security, we've got these three pillars. Sentinel is an alert system that can be modified to each client's preferences. So you can receive alerts from every type of incident or just certain types, be that crime, be that a war risk situation, a severe scenario, anything narcotics related. The range goes on and on. And it can be programmed to be vessel specific. So based on the vessel's location, its route and its destination, we can say, okay, this incident is relevant to the master and you'll receive that as well. Second part is Fathom, which is a software which we utilize to display these alerts. We display the fleets based on IS information, and we display threat areas that we've developed as well. There are industry guiding areas of high risk. So there used to be the industry-wide high risk area that has now been scrapped. And things such as the Joint War Committee's listed areas still exist. They drive insurance premiums, they drive considerations for vessels transiting in certain area. Our areas, we call them dynamic elevated threat areas. As the term says, they're a bit more dynamic. They're not fixed markers in the water for years that don't shift. They're dynamic according to the threat areas, threat as it develops. Elastic Guardian, which combines a bit of the two and is a bespoke service for the ship itself, which is really where the digital support comes in. This service offers routing advice up front, provides a risk assessment, and then monitors the vessel on its journey from a defined point A to a defined point Bravo. This has been the journey Amber's gone through, and other companies have followed suit, or as we've transformed to a global risk management company, we have encountered new competitors in the market aiming for the same, sometimes with other standards, with other systems, but ultimately that's the market we are in. As a bit of a visualization, on the left-hand side, this is what our Fathom platform looks like. You've got in red and purple, you can see that here quite well, incidents, the locations of where we've located an incident. That could be the Black Sea sea mines afloat. In the Red Sea Gulf Aden, it would be Houthi attacks, and then further to the east, Chinese military activity. In this particular case, this is over a year. So all the incidents over a year. Usually our platform displays things for 24 hours, so that's not overcrowded. It's giving you what's prevalent at the moment. Additionally, you can see the vessels marked as triangular icons, different colors, different vessel types. And on the right-hand side, then how our alerts look like. So there's a high priority alert indicating that there's a threat to life involved. This goes out to anyone subscribed, whether it's a preference of theirs or not, whether they're interested in this type of incident or the region is not, that's overridden by the fact that it's a threat to life situation. We want to alert everyone accordingly. In this particular case, we're seeing what most likely is a close proximity explosion of a missile or an unmanned aerial vehicle to a vessel. We've seen that within 20 meters up to 500 meters, always indicating that this was a targeted operation. It's not a mistake that it came that close. And that leads us to the main topic of this evening, the Red Sea crisis. Now, it all kicked off with the Houthi, with the Hamas operating within Israel, taking hostages, killing civilians, and the Israelis responding in kind with military operation onward. The Houthi then took that opportunity to say, we will participate in this conflict and we will support the Palestinian side, initially by launching missiles and UAVs towards Israel. For that, they have to cross the Red Sea northbound. We've got Saudi Arabia in between, we've got Egypt in between until these weapons actually reach Israel. So most of the weapons launched were intercepted by one of these three countries or the US Navy. Though the Saudis and the Egyptians, they've only defended their own airspace. They have not been actively engaged in the Houthi to defend Israel. That's a very critical point, especially for those two countries. With this lack of success, the Houthi changed their plan and started targeting merchant shipping. Merchant shipping, the Red Sea Gulf lane is one of the busiest traffic lanes in the world, coming from Asia through the Suez Canal to European ports and vice versa. On the 19th of November 2023, we had the first incident. You may have seen this video before, where the Houthi-controlled helicopter approaches a vehicle carrier, drops off a team of Houthi, shall we say, special forces. They take control of the bridge, take control of the crew, and take the vessel to the port of Hodeidah. In the months running up to the 12th of January here, we saw a steady expansion of what vessels the Houthi are going after. It started off with this Ro-Ro carrier was an Israeli-owned ship. Soon all the Israeli-owned ships said, okay, we'll stop going through. So there was no target anymore. The Houthi decided to expand what they consider Israeli. And then we're seeing Israeli operating vessels. We're seeing vessels targeted for having a prominent Israeli businessman as minority stakeholder in the owning company. So very vague connections, but still linked to Israel in a way. On the 12th of January, that then ultimately changed to include UK and US owned vessels. That's because in the run up to that day, on the 11th, we had the first US-UK joint airstrikes against Houthi military positions in Yemen. The Houthi warned what they were intending to do should those airstrikes occur, and they followed through with that warning. So there was a clear messaging, the attempt to present themselves as a state actor, reliable in the sense of, well, we said we would, we gave you the warning, now we're following through. We're not acting irrationally. The next big stage was then the 3rd of May of 2024, when the Houthi announced a ban on any company trading with Israel. The ban extended from southern Red Sea to the western Gulf of Aden, meaning any vessel belonging to a company that was trading with Israel with another vessel perhaps was again subject to targeting. Meaning a company's fleet could trigger or increase the risk based on its activities in a different part of the world, increase the risk to a vessel going through the Red Sea, despite having no direct links to Israel or the US or the UK. The last step in this escalatory process was actually de-escalation. 19th of January of this year, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas came into effect. The Houthi announced their intentions to cease operations alongside that ceasefire. So the ceasefire is maintained, and we have since not seen an attempt at a merchant vessel. Thankfully, I might say. What that threat ended up projecting is a total of 278 Houthi-related incidents against merchant vessels. This does not include attacks against military assets. The majority of them we categorize as suspicious approaches. That means the attack came close, there was a real threat to the vessel, tangible threat, but it didn't impact the vessel in a way that it was damaged or casualty. That's more than 50%. As I said, that could be the close proximity explosions, 20 meters off, 500 meters off. It could be also a small boat with armed personnel on board, a little exchange of fire perhaps. Anything that doesn't lead to the vessel becoming a casualty would end up being a suspicious approach. But then we still have approximately 20% of incidents resulting in physical damage. Physical damage in this case can range from a few holes in the hull or in the superstructure all the way down to a vessel being sunk. As you can see on the right-hand side, this diagram shows us in blue the volume of traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, that is the strait linking the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden off Yemen. November 23 as the first month of incidents as a marker, well above 2,000 vessels operating in the area. And we dropped down after the first incidents, not too quickly. So it's a gradual, slow decline till we reach January, where US and UK assets are also considered a target. That's when we see a steep decline in traffic through the region. Incident volume in red, we've got two spikes. December and in June, I believe. Yes, December and June. And as you can see, towards the end of the year, beginning of this year, a decline. We have one incident registered early January 25, thankfully not resulting in anything worse. Prior to the ceasefire, the Houthi were very adamant at signaling they're still capable, so they attacked Israel on a near daily basis, and they attacked the US carrier in the Red Sea routinely. The impact, the outcome of this crisis has to date been 2 vessels sunk, 4 mariners have lost their lives, and in a way we have only narrowly avoided significant environmental impact to the region, with tankers being dead in the water, at risk of spilling their cargo, as well as, of course, further impact to the mariners and their livelihoods. To showcase the weapons we're seeing used in this area, mainly it's missiles, surface to surface, so they're launched from land in Yemen and then impact the vessels or nearby the vessels. Second biggest category are aerial vehicles. Both have had a limited explosive, limited payload in these attacks, which is why the top one, unmanned surface vehicles, is considered for us the one with the greatest threat. These are either purpose-built or repurposed skiffs that are then remote controlled, driven into a ship. We're seeing that in Ukraine as well, or between Ukraine and Russia. The Houthi have adopted a similar tactic, not very often, as you can see, but very effective. These things are laden with explosives, so once they hit the vessel, you've got a significant hull breach. Well, that looks like in pictures, but a bit of an assortment here. I'll start on the top left. You see how the top of cargo hold has been split in half by the impact of a missile. This is purely impact force, not so much a detonation. It's the impact force blowing it apart. Now, those of you who know the size of bulkers know what kind of tonnage we're moving here, so what kind of forces involved with it. In the middle, you see a tanker on fire in the middle of the night. The fire eventually was put out. However, it needed external support. So it needed international military support to tackle this fire. The crew itself was not capable or didn't have the necessary material to achieve this. Few holes created by missile impacts again. In the top right, you see it coming through the main deck out the other side, thankfully above the water line, so no water ingress. See in the bottom right what it looks like on CCTV when a missile impacts directly next to the hull while it's underway. See the middle right hand side, a burnt out superstructure. That was after a direct impact by a missile. Containers, what they look like after impact, and I'll point out 2 more. Bottom left, that's a typical Yemeni style skiff. It's got this pointy prow, and it was sailing, and this is part of the video, it was sailing straight line towards the ship and eventually impacted, detonated, and resulted in this top middle image where the vessel is dead in the water and clearly taking on water in the aft section. The Houthi eventually boarded that vessel, placed detonation explosives around the aft section, and sunk this vessel first. Now that we've got the ceasefire in place, the Houthi have publicly announced towards the shipping industry they intend to change their activities. So they've categorized for us neatly. This is actually taken from an email sent by this organization, HOCC, which is something the Houthi set up to give themselves some legitimacy. The categorized ships there have been targeting into 4 categories and have effectively said we're targeting none of these anymore. Only Israeli owned and flagged vessels will continue to be attacked. Now, obviously, these kind of vessels are still not operating in the area, so we cannot prove the willingness of the Houthi to follow through with this at this point in time. For everyone else, this ban does not exist anymore officially, according to the Houthi statement, and we're only seeing a gradual resurgence of traffic through the region. So there are very tentative attempts of previously at-risk vessels to sail through. We are seeing no impact to them. They are sailing through unhindered. However, it's all based on the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And that is what the core issue behind the considerations right now is. This safety exists because of the ceasefire. Ceasefire, we are in phase 1 of a 2 or 3 phase ceasefire. Following phases still have to be negotiated. So even if ceasefire itself holds, there's ample opportunity for the process to come to an end and the Houthi to resume their operation. Potential triggers in this sense are just the perception that Israel is breach of the agreements. We had that last week where Hamas said we will not hand over the hostages. Israel is not holding up their end of the bargain. That was almost a week in advance of the actual handing over process, so there was ample time to resolve the issues. However, it does showcase the fragility of the situation. Other aspects are Israeli-owned or flagged vessels going through. That would be proof and concept whether they are willing to continue attacking these ships and what the international community would do in response to that. Any US and or UK military operations against the Houthi would also lead to a counterattack by the Houthi. And as I mentioned, the subsequent phases not being negotiated or implemented, / the war being resumed due to failure of the ceasefire. Now, this unique crisis to the shipping industry has led to the need to rethink our approach to risk management, to how we ensure security on board ships. Initially, or historically speaking, especially the private sector, was always about counter-piracy. Counter-piracy is the reinforcement of best management practices. There's a code for that, BMP5. They include having razor wire along the vessel, having access control in place, and a hardened citadel. The citadel being designed to keep the crew safe, while humans trying to breach that door mainly unsuccessfully until military support can intervene. In the case of Somalia, that also meant reaching well offshore Somalia to increase the distance from the threat source. Vulnerable vessels were typically had a low freeboard, so the highest boarded freeboard in the Indian Ocean that we have seen is 9.2 meters. Anything higher than that increases the chances of not being boarded. Speed, of course, if you're able to distance yourself faster from the mothership, the pirates will eventually abandon their operation. And physical security. So having physical security, armed security on board is very effective against the pirate action group. Why? Because these are opportunists. They're not looking to die in a religiously driven context. They are looking to make the profit. So anyone shooting at them, they will take a step back and reassess the situation. Very different with the Houthi. Against the Houthi, BMP5 as it stands was not fit for purpose. So we had to rethink, well, what can a ship do to protect itself, or at least increase the chances of not being impacted? And that means we have to think of defending the vessel further away than the line or range of your handheld rifle. Starts with signals emission. It's being able to track where the vessel is moving, where it is at any given time, having target coordinates to launch your missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. They're given specific locations to where they're going, and in the last stage, they're maneuvered towards the target. So if they're already off target at that point, significantly, chances are they won't hit. Additionally to that, if you were to withhold IS, for example, IS is the main feature we've seen the Houthi utilizing to track not necessarily who's in the area, but where exactly they are. Without IS, and I'll show a slide on that, the impact of the ship is significantly reduced. I was reminded of counter-submarine warfare in the Second World War when I came across this, and I said, okay, we don't only want to stop being visible, we need to prevent dead reckoning. So zigzagging in a sense. Obviously not predictable again, but irregular changes of course and speed alteration. Which is again something we hadn't encountered before with Somali pirates. Full throttle, maximum speed, and keep going. And this is all prior to impact, prior to an attack, based on do we assess this vessel to be at risk of being targeted. Further to this point, the crew, as we said, against piracy citadel, be safe, be in a location where no one can enter. That often ended up being deep inside the vessel's hull, engine room, something like that, where was an enforced door to prevent access. Problem with a missile impacting just above the waterline or near the waterline, if you have your crew in the citadel, they face a realistic possibility of not getting out of the vessel on time in the worst case scenario. So we said, okay, the citadel doesn't have ballistic hardening measures, or at least none relevant to this scenario. We'll bring the crew further up, put them in a safe muster point. Following slide, we'll go into a bit more detail on that one. And in general, what we needed to consider was a merging of these two, because at the same time, in November 23, Somali piracy re-emerged out of the mist. When I joined, piracy had more or less subsided to exist. It was something everyone knew about, but we weren't seeing any activity whatsoever. Parallel to the Houthi activity, we saw pirates come back, so we had to consider both sets for any vessel operating in the region. But we also had to inform a master and security teams and enable the crew to respond to both threats. And then it depends much more on where you are at a given moment, rather than this is my route, and therefore I have to do X, Y, Z, which is still an applied methodology these days. You do your ship security assessment, you say, I'm trading in the Indian Ocean, Somali piracy is the greatest risk. This is what I have to ensure the vessel has in place to reduce the impact. You need to be more dynamic in that approach to counter multiple threats that exist en route. This is what I mean by a safe muster point. So red area showing an area of greater impact, greater risk, green, lesser impact. So best is to be in superstructure, lower in the superstructure, and as central as possible. They have multiple walls around you that can essentially soften the blow. If something were to impact, there's still multiple layers before it reaches the human being. So this was crew safety in place in mind. It's not about preventing the attack itself. We can limit the likelihood of impact, and we can ensure that the crew are as safe as possible. And that also led in the private sector to remodeling of our SOPs, standard operating procedures, including the need to train and drill guards to identify and act against unmanned surface vehicles, as well as knowing what to do in case of an aerial attack. Something, again, under piracy conditions, not necessarily on people's minds. So that was a change we were going through. To showcase the effectiveness of some of these measures, this shows IS usage and the outcome of an attack. And in the overwhelming majority, in 70% of cases of near misses, I'll say, IS was off. We don't have the same percentages in the damage cases. In most cases, when you did sustain damage, you were transmitting an IS signal at the time, meaning it was easier for the Houthi to track your location and guide their equipment to its location. I mentioned at-risk vessels, how we support those. And now the question is, well, how did we identify at-risk vessels? And that's where as it introduced the asset screening assessment came in. That was understanding what's driving the Houthi intent, what are they after, who are they after, and what categories do they end up being. So we are strong, by now medium high risk, medium and weak. This is post ceasefire. So right now, only Israeli owned and flagged vessels are at risk of being targeted, therefore have a strong affiliation with the Houthi target. Then we consider if the ceasefire would fail, Israeli assets are the first in line for being targeted again. That's this medium high risk category. The medium ones are then the US and UK ownership, because that is assessed to more likely be that response to the Houthi actions again once the ceasefire has failed, and a weak category for outdated information. There are two key words here, perceived and outdated. Perceived is what the Houthis think they're seeing. Doesn't matter whether a vessel truly is or is not US owned. If the Houthi see information that says it is and have no verification of that not being the case, they will go after this vessel. Problem with that is the Houthi are not in the game for due diligence. They're not trying to ensure that they only impact truly who should be impacted. They're there to send a message, so they will go after everyone they perceive to be linked accordingly. And that leads us to outdated, because often they used public information that was outdated. The worst case that we saw was 25 months out of date. The vessel was UK owned 2 years prior to the incident, but because the Houthi didn't know any better, they still went after this one, stating why they did. As an example for this, we have here on the left the vessel Wellington. She was indeed US owned starting January 2021. And this ownership changed in May 2023, so almost a year prior to the incident. On the right-hand side, you can see the claim the Houthi issued to the public, saying it was an American vessel they targeted, meaning they were not aware that this vessel by now was British owned. Funny aspect is it doesn't change really the affiliation strength of this vessel, because it was still British and therefore just as well a target, but it shows, the statement shows the Houthi were not aware of that. And that's something the industry has struggled to accept, is it's not about current ownership, it's also about what are the Houthi seeing, and that's very hard to manipulate or to rectify. Another part of this conflict or this crisis has been information warfare. So I just showed you a Houthi statement. I'll show you another one in a minute. We have here an excerpt of the Joint Maritime Information Center, which is a loose organization created in response to the Houthi threat, led by the US Navy, but also including other international forces. And here's a list of attack vessels they've collated. They've got three different columns here: incident type, vessel type, and assessed association, what we call affiliation. For the highlighted vessel Sunyan, this statement, the international community says there was no direct affiliation, no direct association with Israel, the US, or UK. In essence, that is correct. This vessel was targeted because of an involved company's Israel trade with another vessel. So indirect link, indeed, but nonetheless a link. This statement creates the impression that this vessel was targeted for no reason. The messaging behind it is, well, we're not going to accept this linkage between trade and targeting a vessel. So it's a political message just as much, because they're military authorities. On the right-hand side is what the Houthi said to the same vessel, and said, well, it's due to the violation of their ban. At the same time, the Houthi would issue statements, such as this one. In this case, they claimed in one go 3 attacks on merchant vessels. On the right-hand side, you can see the vessel's movements the week prior to the statement coming out. If the vessel indeed had been attacked, we would expect to see IS go off. So there's IS data points, so still accurate, still coming in. So IS remains on. What you can see here, but there's no speed increase. There's no variation there, and there's no change of course. There's no indication whatsoever that this vessel actually encountered a threat to itself. There was no reports, as I said, nothing giving it away here. None of our eyes on the water had witnessed or heard anything in support of this claim. And that is where, if the spike in the summer of 2024 comes from, majority of those incidents were claimed attacks. They never really impacted the community on the water. However, we do believe that every claim was preceded by a launch, just that the weapon never reached its target. There was one case where a missile hull was found in a valley in Somalia. We know it had been launched from Yemen, should have gone across Somalia, impacted the vessel in the Indian Ocean. The missile malfunctioned, came down prematurely. The vessel never knew it was targeted. If the Houthi had not issued their statement, we wouldn't have known. The good thing about these statements was, however, it gave us an indication of what they're trying to attempt, what they're trying to achieve, who they're targeting. That's what this target profile was built on. Not only who's being impacted, but what are the Houthis saying about it. This also goes in line with their phases of escalation. They came up with that concept halfway through the crisis. And one of those phases was expanding the area of operations. So we've got here the Gulf of Aden and Southern Indian Ocean, Western Arabian Sea. The majority of incidents are off Yemen's coast, actually. There were a few claimed attacks in the Mediterranean, no confirmed impact. A few attacks here outside Indian Ocean, 3 confirmed incidents, if you like. One was the missile that fell in Somalia, 2 actually close proximity explosion. Now I've given you an insight into how the private sector, or let's say the private risk management sector, responded to this crisis. The military community responded in their way, with 3 separate military operations. First was Operation Prosperity Guardian, US-led, started on the 18th of December, so a month after the first incident, and was defensive in nature. It was all about defensive aerial support, so maintaining a air defense hub over the southern Red Sea. They had their destroyers distributed strategically to maintain that defensive capability. The assets supporting this operation in terms of surface fleets were US Navy and Royal Navy. Everyone else supporting this operation was in personnel in the headquarters only, or information sharing. They communicate through 3 core organizations. US Central Command, they issue their own statements on a regular basis. UKMTO, the United Kingdom's Maritime Trade Organization, are a leading information body in the Indian Ocean region. And the JMIC, the report I showed you earlier with the list of vessels, they were sending out reports as well. Parallel, but also later, EU NAVFOR Aspides. Aspides was the EU Navy operation, parallel to Atalanta. Atalanta is the counter-piracy operation with their mandate, their assets. Aspides was operating in unison with that, with a separate mandate, however. Their goal is more close protection. They will provide convoys. They will guide either a single vessel or multiple vessels, depending on the European Navy's assessed or threat assessment in that situation, and guide those assets through. The problem is the European navies had limited capabilities in terms of fleets. They had, on average, 4 surface vessels available. Obviously, the vessels used needed air defense capability. So mostly air defense frigates, destroyers. At times, other vessel types were in theater with the lesser capability in that sense. This operation as well communicated through QMTO and JMIC, however, also MSC HOA, which is now MSCIO, Maritime Security Construct, Indian Ocean. And I've highlighted this to showcase we've got two operations led by two different countries or group of countries with different lines of communication, with different assets, with different goals. Thirdly, we have an offensive mission, Operation Poseidon Archer. That was the US-led airstrike campaign against the Houthi, mainly with US Air Force and Navy assets, as well as Royal Air Force and Royal Navy engagement. As of May of 2024, the Houthi had stated that 452 attacks had occurred, causing 40 fatalities and 25 injuries. However, the Houthi were not deterred in their operations. At times, they were slowed because radar sites were targeted, missile sites were targeted, so they were not able to operate as previously, but nonetheless, they were able to operate and they were willing to operate. Deterrence did not quite come into effect here with this campaign. I'll circle back to the private sector once more. Private security teams, the armed teams on board the vessel. Against waterborne threats, they are effective, and though we have to distinguish between a state actor and a non-state actor, nonetheless, they are effective. This is where the video that caused our disruption at the beginning of this event would have been. It shows how one of our teams successfully destroys one of those approaching remote-controlled, waterborne, improvised explosive devices, i.e. a repurposed skiff, is approaching the vessel. It's maneuvering erratically. It is unclear if it's manned or unmanned for a long time. And only in the very last second do they actually manage to hit the explosives which detonate the boat before it impacts the vessel. This may not sound successful, but it is minor damage to the hull compared to breach of the hull and water ingress if the boat had impacted fully. Now that's a success story. There are unfortunately also videos out there showing almost the opposite reaction from one of those security teams, which showcases these private entities still need to be regulated and monitored accordingly to maintain a certain standard of training, certain standard of equipment and capability. Meaning, the RUF rules of use of force, they have to be reviewed to allow these individuals to engage one of those targets earlier. As I said, it's sometimes unclear for a long period of time if it's manned or not. Once it's manned, it's a very different scenario because you're suddenly endangering human life. No matter who they are, they're still human beings. You cannot just shoot at them because they seem to be a threat. It has to be an escalation process, warning shots, verbal warnings, and only in the last minute are you supposed to engage. With pirates, that's doable because the pirates still have to come alongside the vessel, get their ladder up or their grappling hook, whatever, and scale the freeboard. With the explosive laden boat, which is only aiming to hit the vessel, you don't have that reaction time anymore. And worryingly enough, in some cases, the Houthis utilized dummies on these boats to create the impression people were on board, though they weren't, or still remote control. So it's a difficult situation to apply generalized rules that are lawful. And our standard operation procedures need to reflect the difference between the state actor, non-state actor. As I said, we in-house have already done that. So we are saying, okay, if it's clearly piracy related, you apply the traditional rules of use of force, if you like. If it's potential of a waterborne IED, consider escalating a bit earlier, but you still need to maintain that assurance that there's no human life on board, because that changes that threat straight away. As such, we as the private risk management entities can and should operate as a force multiplier for naval missions, naval assets in threat areas in general. There's, regardless of where we are in the world, we are at the center of everything a merchant vessel. And it's got its first layer of defense, razor wire, the access control, everything on board, or anything that can be done on board. But that's a very limited view of what's happening around them. They have their radar picture, and that's the furthest this vessel is seeing. As that secondary layer of defense, we have then the armed security team, which has that digital support from companies like us. So where we operate both, we are feeding our teams with the necessary information to operate successfully in threat areas. And as I said, the digital support also offers a kind of over the horizon scanning, because we're supporting multiple vessels in a region at any given time. So we have that information feeding into us. We can analyze it, dissect it, feed back into the assets. And this all supports then what the military is doing. And we have these two rings, how we saw it play out in the Red Sea. We've got those missions that are closely supporting a merchant vessel, that they can respond to a threat to this vessel. However, because of the mission restrictions, they will only respond to a threat to the vessel they're supporting. So if a vessel 10 miles further away is targeted, less likely that that attack will be defended, because they are responsible for this asset, not the other one. And then lastly, the aerial defense, which is that umbrella that defends everyone regardless. However, obviously can easily be overloaded these days with the number of attacks. We're looking at 2-3 destroyers. They have their radar systems. They have about 30 vertical launchers in one go. They can launch up to 30 in quick succession, then they have to reload. The same with close protection. The amount of stuff that can be intercepted is a limiting factor, regardless, for anyone, whether it be military or private sector. Obviously, military has the firepower. That's the one thing we don't have, and that's a regulatory consideration. Another aspect we've seen in this domain is information sharing. It leans back on to the information warfare. There's what the military puts out as statements, and there's what the military bodies know. And for all of us to work better together, we need to know, we have to have that better understanding of what's happening around us in the entire area and in the region. So that means the vessels reporting what they're seeing. It's us as risk management companies analyzing that information, sharing it with relevant other companies, sharing it with the shipping industry again, sharing it with the military authorities, and that, in that sense, creating a flow of information sharing, because that's the only way everyone will understand where threats lie. We routinely come across incidents that we just happen to hear about, sometimes quite severe in nature. The insurers may have been aware of it because they were the underwriting party, or it was a P&I club, or the military authority that could talk about it freely for a plethora of reasons. Most often it's a commercial consideration. But we have to breach these walls and say, okay, there's a necessity for the seafaring community to know as much as possible so that we have a better understanding of what's happening. In the beginning, we weren't sure what vessels are being attacked by the Houthi. So we had a broad range of ships that fell into a category where we said, you are at risk. And over time, we were able to narrow that down based on data, based on statements, based on actions. Well, that's, again, because we had the information, because we knew what the Houthi were saying, meaning what they were thinking. We knew what they were doing and how that was playing out on the water. If we take Iran as a different example, Iran also occasionally attacks merchant vessels. But these cases sometimes are not even reported to anyone. So no one knows it actually happened. Therefore, we don't know the extent of the damage. We don't know where it's happened, when it's happened, why it may have happened. So we have no indication of, well, who else might be at risk in a future scenario. So information sharing is key to maritime domain awareness, which helps all of us create a better and safer environment for the seafaring community. Well, as that means, especially for cooperation between us as the risk management companies, the military authorities, and the shipping industry, who are the subject of all of our considerations, we need to acknowledge, number one, that the military has a mandate. Any military operation, any military vessel has a mandate. And within the limitations of that mandate, they will operate. A commander of a vessel is not, or does not have the power to exceed that mandate for whatever reason. It needs to go up the chain of command and be approved, come back down. Same goes for operation constraints. As we said, Aspides had usually on average 4 surface vessels to its for its operation activity, meaning it couldn't necessarily service every vessel needing support. Therefore, requesting commercial vessels to delay their transit, which costs, of course, all the involved companies significant amounts of money. And suddenly we're looking at a commercial decision to say, let's go anyway. We'll be fine. We'll get through. So it requires us, as a private sector, being the middleman between military and shipping community or shipping companies to explain the commercial drivers behind the decision making. Something we are aware of. The military doesn't necessarily operate in these spheres, therefore is less aware of the necessities a commercial entity has when operating in the world. On the other hand, we as private sector, especially with armed personnel, we are subject to regulation. We need to maintain compliance, but that is also what ensures quality across multiple companies, is regulation ensuring that we have our measures in place and therefore fostering trust in us as that entity between perhaps military and shipping community, and also fostering the cooperation between all three, especially between us and the military. And that then leads to enhanced maritime domain awareness, which is the key aspect here. And that's what our lessons have been. Us knowing more about what's driving the threat has helped us mitigate the threat. Thank you very much.